All right, we have a big Supreme Court decision that we wanted to break down for you all that could have huge ramifications about workers' ability to strike. Let's put this up on the screen and then I'll tell you some of the backstory. So, this is from More Perfect Union. They say breaking the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of a concrete company that wanted to sue a union because a strike cost them money. The 8-1 decision means the company Glacier Northwest Incorporated can sue the union over a strike where truck drivers left wet concrete in their trucks. So we covered the story previously, but just to remind everybody the backstory here, what happened is you had workers represented by a Teamsters local who were in the middle of negotiations with this company, Glacier Northwest, and those negotiations were not bearing fruit. The union was dissatisfied, the workers were dissatisfied, and so they decide to go on strike. As one does. This is the way that if you're in a union, that you leverage the power that you have as a worker and the fact that the company needs your labor in order to succeed. That's the way you leverage your power. So they walk off the job at a time that was after the, I think, warning truck drivers had already gone and they had wet cement in their trucks. Now, they actually tried to mitigate some of the economic harm to the company, which I would argue they're not necessarily required to do, but they sought to mitigate some of the economic harm by keeping the drums in the truck running so that that wet concrete wouldn't just instantly harden and damage the trucks. Yet because they were on strike, there still was some economic harm to the company because they were unable to deliver that material, and so they lost money on the fact they were unable to deliver that material, and I think they just had to dispose of it ultimately, and they also argue that there was some risk there could have been damage to the trucks if it had been allowed to harden in the barrels. So Glacier said, "All right, we're gonna sue you, the union, because the workers went on strike and caused us economic harm." Well, a state court said, "No, you can't do this because number one, this isn't really even our jurisdiction. We're talking about federal laws here that, are in play. The National Labor Relations Board, they're the ones that should investigate and should decide whether this was like egregious behavior on behalf of the union or not." This went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that's how you end up with this 8-1 decision that now sends it back down and says, yes, you can actually sue this union over the damages from this strike. Now, let me say a couple of things. First of all, law clearly recognizes that if you are a worker engaged in a strike, you can't engage in violence, you can't engage in direct vandalism. Those sorts of things are out of bounds, and there can be suits in state courts. That's like very clear cut. But why this is so troubling and so damaging is now you're sending a message to all companies and all corporations that if you're economically harmed at all by a strike, you may have an ability to sue the workers and sue the union. You can imagine what kind of a chilling effect that will have too on workers who are considering striking. Well, the whole point of a strike is to use your labor, I mean, to cause some economic harm that puts pressure on the employer to come to the negotiating table and bargain. So that's why this is such a potentially damaging decision. The one dissenting justice here was Ketanji Brown Jackson. She argued the majority is inserting itself into an assessment of labor disputes that is lawfully the purview of the National Labor Relations Board, and that the court is overstepping their jurisdiction. That's basically what the state court had argued as well. She also argued that the court is putting the onus on workers and their union to avert any economic damage to Glacier, the company, when it was actually on the company to take steps to negotiate in good faith with the union and try to mitigate their own losses. Put this next article from Reuters up on the screen. This gives you a sense of some of the arguments here that were made by the justices on either side of this issue. Their headline is U.S. Supreme Court hands defeat to organized labor in trucker strike case. So Amy Coney Barrett is the author of the majority ruling. She said the union's actions had not only destroyed the concrete, but had also, quote, posed a risk of foreseeable, aggravated, and imminent harm to Glacier's trucks. That harm did not come to pass, but she's saying it could have come to pass. And she says because the union took affirmative steps to endanger Glacier's property rather than reasonable precautions to mitigate that risk, the National Labor Relations Act does not arguably protect its conduct. Again, that should be left to the National Labor Relations Board to adjudicate, but that's what they argued. And just to give you a little bit of a taste of the Ketanji Brown Jackson dissent, she said, and I thought this was well put, workers are not indentured servants bound to continue laboring until any planned work stoppage would be as painless as possible for their master. So that is the way that she was arguing the other
Yeah.
side of this. Last thing to note here, Sagar, guess which side the administration took?
I
They had
already
nothing.
know.
They
Yeah.
took the side of the company and said they should have the ability to sue. It should go back down to the state court and they should be able to adjudicate it
Yeah.
there. So Mr. Most, pro worker, pro union president in history once again stabbing workers in the back.
This is bad for a variety of reasons because what people don't understand is that even the standing, the ability to sue, for example, we would and every other media company on earth would cover things dramatically differently if we did not know that the bar was incredibly high in order to try and sue people who are in the media whenever you're talking about public officials. You would basically have a British type system, or in many of the other Western countries, where they can effectively file a complaint against you for anything, and the First Amendment and the level of legal protection does not apply to the media. What ends up happening? A fusion of the state and of the media. Now, we already kind of live in that system, but we have at least more free speech protections for people who want to use them should they try. The threat of legal action itself, ask anybody who is in business. The threat itself is chilling whenever it comes to speech. The same can be said here. Just the standing, the ability to sue will and can guide future strike actions, which are dramatically in favor of the company. So it's very obvious here who benefits from this change in the from this change, like in the current way that we look at things, and it
Yeah.
will have a bad effect. Especially, it's kicking people when they're down because they're trying to increase the unemployment rate already, and to
Yeah.
try and limit whatever power the workers had in a tight labor market. So it really is. It's a especially bad timing for it to
Yeah, and
happen.
it's disgraceful to see that, the uniparty at work here, that you have only one dissent
Mhm.
from Ketanji Brown Jackson, and kudos to her for, in a very well argued dissent, I would say, and very strongly worded, but ultimately she's just one person on the court. There's a lot of talk about like the liberals and the conservatives on the court, but far too often the two sides tend to agree when it comes to bolstering capital and crushing labor. As regular viewers of the show, or, regular people who exist in America know, the law is already overwhelmingly on the side of the bosses, especially when it comes to the right to organize and now the right to strike. So these little levers of power and leverage that working class people actually have, I don't think it's an accident that at a time when you have this gigantic gulf between huge support for labor, huge support for workers, huge support for organized labor and unions in particular, but you have such low union density. I think that a lot of companies are seeing, the movement at Starbucks, the movement at Amazon, at REI, at Chipotle, all these places across the country, and they're very nervous. So this gives the Supreme Court a chance to sort of check workers at a time when union support is super high, but you still have very low union density. So it's an attempt to try to keep them from gaining any sort of traction within the American economy. I think it could be really devastating because, every strike is going to cause some economic harm to the company. And now they've opened the door for, no matter, let's say you're in a More Perfect Union actually did a great video on this, but that I recommend to people. So let's say you're a Starbucks worker and you go on strike, which a number of locations they have. Let's say the milk spoils. Let's say they lose some customers, whatever happens. Now, Starbucks, Howard Schultz and Co. can come out and sue the workers and sue the union because they dared to voice, to exercise their right to strike, to demand better conditions, fair wages, whatever it is that they're after. So I think it could be incredibly damaging, really devastating. And, it's not surprising, but it's really sad to see the Biden administration and almost all of the liberal and all of the conservative justices team up to crush workers in this way.
Yep, absolutely agreed on that, Crystal.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Soccer and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.